My father's hand connected with my face in front of 200 guests. The sound echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. My sister Victoria screamed, "Get out!" and her voice carried the triumph of someone who had been waiting years for this moment. My mother turned away. She didn't gasp, didn't intervene, just turned her back like she had done my entire life. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I touched my lip where I tasted copper, and I looked at every single one of them. Then I walked out of that birthday party with my head held high and blood on my chin. The next morning I signed a check for $100 million to purchase 2 private mansions on Nujuma Island in the Red Sea. Paid in full. They still don't know who I really am. They still think I'm the broken girl who disappeared 10 years ago, the troubled daughter who blamed herself for her brother's death. But Daniel didn't die the way they think he did. And I have spent a decade becoming someone they never imagined I could be, someone with the power to destroy everything they built on his grave. They called me the ghost, the forgotten one, the girl who lived in the basement. But ghosts have a way of coming back. And when they do, the living should be afraid. My name is Grace Whitmore, and this is the story of how I burned my family's lies to the ground. The Whitmore name meant something in Greenwich, Connecticut. 3 generations of real estate empire, country club memberships and charity galas and photographs in society pages. My father, Richard Whitmore, built his identity on that name: CEO, philanthropist, pillar of the community. The kind of man who shook hands with governors and senators in our living room while his youngest daughter listened from a basement apartment he pretended didn't exist. Our estate sat on 12 acres of manicured perfection. Colonial architecture, circular driveway, gardens that were photographed for magazines. From the outside it looked like the American dream carved into Connecticut soil. But I learned early that beautiful houses can hide the ugliest truths. My mother, Catherine, was a master of appearances. Charity board member, garden club president. The woman who could smile through any scandal and make it disappear with the right phone calls. She hosted dinner parties where crystal clinked and laughter floated through rooms I was rarely invited to enter. In public, she was gracious and warm. In private, she looked through me like I was made of glass. Not fragile glass. The kind you don't bother to notice because it's been there so long it becomes invisible. Then there was Victoria, 7 years older than me. The golden child. The daughter they displayed at every event and groomed for every success. Victoria had the master suite upstairs with 2 windows facing east, so the morning sun could wake her gently. She had the tutors and the designer clothes and the introductions to all the right people. When she walked into a room, our parents looked at her with pride that bordered on worship. When I walked into a room, they checked their watches. They stopped saying my name at dinner after Daniel's funeral. I became her or she or sometimes just silence where my name used to be, like even the sound of it was too much effort to produce. I lived in the basement apartment from the time I was 6 years old. My parents called it cozy, said I was lucky to have my own space. But it was a converted storage room with 1 small window at ground level where I could see feet walking past but never faces. The ceiling pipes clanked at night like something trapped and screaming. The walls held dampness no matter the season. And every night I could hear my family living their lives above me. Victoria's music, my parents' dinner parties, laughter that never included me. "You're the strong one, Grace." That's what they told me whenever I asked for anything. When I wanted to trade rooms with Victoria, my father looked up from his newspaper and said, "Your sister's room has stairs, and you want her falling and breaking something." When I got straight A's, my mother nodded and said, "Well, of course you did." When I won the science fair, she forgot to come. Victoria had a hair appointment. Strong meant convenient to ignore. Strong meant doesn't need comfort. Strong meant we can put her in the basement and pretend she wanted to be there. But there was one person who saw me. Daniel. My brother was 11 years older than me, already in college when I was learning to read. But he came home on weekends just to check on me. He was the only one who knocked on my basement door. The only one who said my name like it mattered. Daniel would bring me books from his college library and teach me chess on the cold basement floor. He called me Little Architect because I loved building things with blocks. He snuck me food when I was sent to bed without dinner, which happened more often than anyone would admit. When Victoria said something cruel and I tried not to cry, Daniel would find me later and say, "You're smarter than all of them," combined Grace. "One day they'll see it." I held on to those words like oxygen. Daniel was supposed to inherit everything. He was being groomed as the future of Whitmore real estate, the golden son even more beloved than the golden daughter. But Daniel wasn't like them. He had a conscience. He asked questions they didn't want answered, and he protected me in ways that made our parents uncomfortable. I once heard him arguing with our father in the study. "She's your daughter too," he said. "Why does she live like a tenant in her own house?" My father's response was cold and final. "Victoria has needs. Grace is fine. Don't create problems where there aren't any." But there were problems. Daniel saw them even when no one else did. The night before he died, he called me. I was 16. It was late and his voice sounded strange, urgent, almost afraid. "Grace," he said, "I found something. About Dad, about the company. It's bad." He asked me to wait for him, said he was driving home, said he needed to show me something and I shouldn't tell anyone. He never made it home. They said he lost control on a rainy road, said his car hit a tree, said he died on impact. And within days the narrative formed like ice over a grave. If Grace hadn't called him, he wouldn't have left early. She distracted him. She's probably the reason he crashed. My mother said the words that would haunt me for the next decade. "It should have been you in that car, Grace, not him." I tried to tell them about the phone call, about what Daniel said he'd found, but no one listened. They were too busy burying their golden son and blaming their invisible daughter. 3 months after Daniel's funeral, my grandmother Eleanor came to see me in the basement. She was my father's mother and the only person in that house who had ever defended me. She pressed an envelope into my hands, sealed with wax, heavy with something inside. "Daniel was going to give this to you," she said. "He told me the night before he died. Now I'm keeping his promise." Her eyes were fierce and knowing, like she could see everything that was coming. "Not yet," she whispered. "When you're ready. When you're strong enough to burn it all down." I was 17 when I finally opened that box in Geneva. Inside were 3 things: $47 million in bearer bonds, a police report stamped sealed with findings that made my hands shake, and a handwritten note from Daniel dated the day before he died. What I read in that note changed everything. It proved that my brother's death wasn't an accident. It was murder, and someone in my family knew exactly what happened. The basement apartment became my world when I was 6 years old. My parents said Victoria needed more space for her things. They said I was flexible. They said I would love having my own little corner of the house. What they meant was that I was easy to move, easy to relocate, easy to forget about once the door closed behind me. The room had been a storage space before they cleared it out and tossed a mattress inside. One small window sat at ground level where I could watch feet walk past but never see faces. The ceiling pipes clanked and groaned at night like something alive and suffering. In winter they screamed. In summer they sweated rust onto the concrete floor. The walls held dampness that never fully dried no matter how many times I wiped them down. The smell was always the same: old books, mildew, laundry detergent drifting from the utility room next door. I had a single bed pushed against the wall, a desk from a garage sale with one leg shorter than the others so it wobbled when I wrote, a lamp that flickered during thunderstorms. These were my possessions. These were the boundaries of my childhood. But the worst part wasn't the room itself. The worst part was the ceiling. I learned to read that ceiling like a map. I knew exactly where each family member walked. Victoria's room was directly above mine, and every night I heard her footsteps, her music playing, her friends laughing during sleepovers I was never invited to attend. I would lie in bed and press my palm against the cold concrete above me, feeling for vibrations, listening for some sign that someone up there remembered I existed. Most nights there was nothing but silence where my name should have been. I learned to measure my worth by that silence. by the footsteps that never paused at the basement door, by the voices that never called down the stairs. They called me the strong one. I heard it so many times it became a brand burned into my identity. "You're the strong one, Grace," said like a compliment, wielded like a weapon. I first heard it when I was 8 and fell off my bicycle, scraped both knees bloody on the driveway gravel. I didn't cry because I had already learned that crying got me nothing but impatience. My mother glanced at the blood and handed me a bandage. "You're the strong one," she said. "You'll be fine." A week earlier, Victoria had scraped her knee. She got ice cream, a new dress, a day off from school. I got a bandage and the expectation to move on. Strong meant I didn't need comfort. Strong meant I could handle disappointment. Strong meant no one had to feel guilty about forgetting me. Strong meant convenient. Strong meant invisible. My mother forgot to pick me up from school once. I was 10 years old. I sat on the bench outside for 3 hours watching every other child get collected by parents who remembered they existed. When I finally walked home, my feet aching and my stomach empty, I found her in the living room braiding Victoria's hair. "Oh," she said without looking up. "I thought your father was getting you." He hadn't. No one had. No one had thought about me at all. I learned to ask for nothing and expect less. I learned that Victoria's tears were currency that could purchase anything while my silence was simply expected payment. By the time I was 12, I had perfected the art of disappearing in plain sight. I could sit at the dinner table and not be spoken to for an entire meal. I could walk through the living room and not be acknowledged. I became a ghost in my own home long before anyone thought to call me that. But Daniel saw me. Daniel always saw me. He was 11 years older and already at college when I was still learning to tie my shoes. But he came home on weekends. Not for our parents, not for Victoria. For me. He was the only person who ever knocked on my basement door. The only one who walked down those stairs without being forced. He brought me books from his university library. Novels and science texts and poetry collections that smelled like dust and possibility. He taught me chess on the cold concrete floor, sitting cross-legged across from me like we had all the time in the world. He called me Little Architect because I loved building things with blocks and cardboard and whatever scraps I could find in the basement storage. When our parents forgot to save me dinner, Daniel would appear with a plate wrapped in foil. Still warm, always with extra helpings of whatever I liked best. Daniel once told me the basement isn't where you belong, Grace. It's where they put you so they don't have to see what they're doing. I was 12. I didn't fully understand. But I memorized every word. I kept them locked in my chest like a treasure I could take out and examine when the loneliness got too heavy to carry alone. He fought for me in ways that made our parents uncomfortable. I heard him arguing with our father once. "She's your daughter too," he said. His voice sharp with frustration. "Why does she live like a tenant in her own house?" My father's response was ice. "Victoria has needs. Grace is fine. Don't create problems, Daniel." That was always their answer. Don't create problems. As if my existence was a problem. As if wanting to be loved was causing trouble. Daniel promised me things would change. When I take over the company, he said everything will be different. "You're smarter than all of them, Grace. One day they'll see it. One day I'll make sure they see it." I believed him. I had to believe someone. Victoria made sure I knew my place. In public she was perfect. Charming smile, gracious manners. The daughter everyone admired. But when the adults weren't watching, she showed me exactly what she thought of the basement girl. She called me names that still echo in the quietest hours. "You smell like the basement. Mom only keeps you because it would look bad to send you away. Daniel feels sorry for you, and that's not the same as love." Small cruelties delivered with surgical precision. She hid my homework so I would get in trouble. Accidentally spilled juice on my only nice dress the morning of school picture day. Told her friends I was the help when they asked who I was. On my 13th birthday there was no party, no cake, just a card left on the kitchen counter with my name spelled wrong. That same week Victoria turned 20 and our parents threw her a celebration with 200 guests. I was told to stay in the basement. It's not appropriate for children, they said. I heard the music and laughter all night. Every note a reminder of where I belonged. Daniel found me at midnight. I was sitting on the basement stairs crying into my hands. He sat beside me and pulled a slice of cake from his jacket pocket, wrapped in a napkin, smuggled just for me. "Happy birthday, little architect," he whispered. "Don't let them make you small. You're going to be bigger than all of this someday." Victoria gave me a gift that year. I unwrapped it at the dinner table with everyone watching. Inside was an empty box. "Oops," she said, hand over her mouth, eyes sparkling with cruelty dressed as accident. Must have forgotten to put something in it. Everyone laughed. My mother, my father, even the housekeeper smiled. I smiled too. I had learned by then that crying only made it worse. Then came the night that changed everything. I was 16. Daniel was 25. It was late and my phone buzzed with his name. His voice when I answered was strange, urgent, almost afraid. "Grace," he said. "I found something. About Dad. About the company." "It's bad." He asked if I could wait up for him, said he was leaving a business dinner early, said he needed to show me something and I shouldn't tell anyone. I heard my mother scream at 2 a.m. The police called to say Daniel's car had gone off the road, hit a tree, dead on impact. Within days, the blame found its target. If Grace hadn't called him, he wouldn't have left early. She distracted him. She probably had him on the phone when he crashed. My father's eyes turned to ice whenever they landed on me. My mother said the words that would haunt me for a decade. "It should have been you in that car, not him." I tried to tell them about Daniel's call, about the fear in his voice, about what he said he'd found. No one listened. No one wanted to hear the basement girls suggest that something was wrong with their perfect son's perfect death. But I saw something at the funeral that no one else noticed. Victoria standing by the casket, and for just a moment when she thought no one was looking, she smiled. Not grief, not shock, relief. I never forgot that smile. I never stopped wondering what it meant. 3 months later, my grandmother Eleanor came to the basement. She pressed an envelope into my hands, sealed with wax, heavy with secrets. "Daniel was going to give this to you," she said. "He told me the night before he died. Now I'm keeping his promise." Her last words before she left still echo in my memory. "Not yet, Grace. When you're ready. When you're strong enough to burn it all down." I held that envelope for 3 months before I opened it. What I found inside proved that Daniel's death wasn't an accident. It was murder. And someone in my family knew exactly what happened. I kept Eleanor's envelope hidden under the loose floorboard in my basement room, the same spot where I hid my journal and the small treasures Daniel had given me over the years. Every night for 3 months I pulled it out and held it in my hands, felt the weight of it, traced the wax seal with my fingertips. Eleanor's words echoed through my sleepless nights. "When you're ready. When you're strong enough to burn it all down." I wasn't ready. I wasn't strong. I was a 16-year-old girl sleeping in a basement while my family blamed me for my brother's death. But the envelope called to me. The secrets inside pressed against the paper like something alive and waiting to be born. The night I finally opened it, I couldn't sleep. The house above me was silent for once. No footsteps, no music, no laughter reminding me of everything I wasn't invited to join. I sat on my bed with the lamp flickering and my hands trembling. I broke the wax seal, unfolded the contents, and my entire world shifted on its axis. Inside was a letter in Daniel's handwriting, dated the day before he died. His script was usually confident and clean, but this letter was different, shaky, rushed, like he'd written it knowing he was running out of time. "Grace," he wrote, "if you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and there are things you need to know." I found evidence that Dad has been stealing from grandmother Eleanor for years. Millions siphoned from her personal accounts into shell companies, forged signatures, manipulated records. I confronted him tonight. He denied everything, but I saw the fear in his eyes. He knows I know, and I think he's going to do something about it. The letter continued with details, account numbers, company names, dates of transactions. Daniel had documented everything with the precision of someone who understood that truth needed proof to survive. But it was the final paragraph that made my blood freeze. Nolan is involved, he wrote. The handwriting here was even more unsteady. He's not just Victoria's boyfriend. He's Dad's fixer. I don't know how deep it goes, but I know enough to be afraid. Don't trust him, Grace. Don't trust any of them. If something happens to me, take this to someone outside the family, someone who can't be bought. And whatever you do, don't let them know what you have until you're ready to use it. I read those words over and over until dawn crept through my small window. My brother hadn't died in an accident. He'd been killed because he discovered the truth. And now I was holding that same truth in my shaking hands. My first instinct was to run upstairs and throw the evidence in my father's face, to scream at him in front of everyone, to make him pay for what he'd done. But Daniel's voice stopped me. His warning echoed in my mind. Don't let them know what you have until you're ready to use it. I was 16 years old, no money, no allies, no power. If I revealed what I knew, my father would destroy the evidence and paint me as a liar. The troubled girl who killed her brother and now was trying to destroy his memory. No one would believe the basement ghost over the family patriarch. So I made my first strategic decision. Stay silent. Gather more. Wait. I hid the documents back under the floorboard. I went to dinner that night and sat across from my father and didn't flinch. He asked Victoria about her classes. He didn't look at me once. I thought you killed your son to protect your secrets and you don't even know that I know. I smiled and passed the salt. The war had begun, but I was the only one who knew we were fighting. Eleanor grew weaker in the months after she gave me the envelope. Cancer, they said. But she had been fighting it for years, and something in her seemed to surrender after Daniel's death. Like losing her grandson had stolen whatever strength she had left. I visited her every day after school, sat beside her bed and held her papery hand and listened to her stories about the family. Your father wasn't always this way, she told me. Money changed him. Power corrupted him. But you, Grace, you're different. You see things clearly. That's your weapon. Don't let anger make you stupid. Be smart, be patient, be devastating. She made me promise to wait, to build something of my own before I tried to tear down what they had built. She told me there was more waiting for me, more than the documents Daniel had left, more than I could imagine. Eleanor died 6 months after Daniel. I was holding her hand when she took her last breath. Her final words were a whisper meant only for me. Geneva. The box. Everything you need. The funeral was grand and performative. My father gave a speech about what a remarkable woman she was. I sat in the back row, invisible as always, and thought about all the ways he had stolen from her while she was alive. The hypocrisy was so thick I could taste it. 1 week after we buried Eleanor, a lawyer called me on a phone she had given me months before. A burner phone. Untraceable. His voice was calm and professional with a Swiss accent that made every word sound like a secret. Miss Whitmore, he said, your grandmother has left you her personal fortune. $47 million held in accounts your family has no knowledge of. She was very specific about the arrangements. You are the sole beneficiary. You must claim it in person when you turn 18. I was 17 years old, sitting in a basement room that smelled like mildew. And I had just learned I was secretly richer than my father. The months that followed taught me to wear masks. I performed the role of the guilty daughter, the troubled girl, the one everyone blamed and no one noticed. Meanwhile, I watched and listened and documented everything. I learned the rhythms of my father's lies, the patterns of Victoria's cruelty, the architecture of a family built on secrets and silence. Then Nolan Brooks entered our lives, and everything became more dangerous. He was the son of my father's biggest business partner, handsome in that polished prep school way, charming when he wanted to be. He started dating Victoria 6 months after Daniel's death, and the family welcomed him like a gift from the universe. The perfect match for the golden child, the merger of two powerful families. But something about Nolan made my skin crawl. He paid attention to me in ways that felt wrong, not romantic, something else, assessing, measuring, like he was trying to figure out how much I knew. He would find excuses to be near me at family dinners, ask questions about Daniel that seemed innocent but felt like traps. "You two were close, weren't you?" he said once. His eyes too focused, his smile too careful. He talked about you a lot. I remembered Daniel's warning, "Nolan is Dad's fixer." I smiled and said nothing, and felt the danger radiating off him like heat. Victoria and Nolan announced their engagement 8 months after Daniel died. At the party, I stood in the corner watching everyone celebrate. Nolan caught my eye across the room and raised his glass. His smile said, "I know you're watching." His eyes said, "I'm watching you too." Victoria saw the exchange and her face hardened into something that would become permanent hatred. He cornered me in the kitchen later that night. Stood too close, spoke too softly. "You're the quiet one," he said. "I've always found quiet people interesting. They notice things, they remember things." He paused and I felt his breath on my ear. "What do you remember about Daniel Grace?" I looked him directly in the eyes. "Nothing," I said. "I remember nothing at all." He smiled like he didn't believe me. He was right not to. I spent senior year planning my escape. Applied to colleges in secret without guidance or support from anyone. Boston University offered me a full scholarship, and I accepted without telling my family until the papers were signed. The night I announced it at dinner, my father barely looked up from his plate. "Boston," he said. "That's far." My mother nodded absently. "Well, I suppose you've always been independent." Victoria smiled her cruel smile. "Finally! The basement will make a great wine cellar. No congratulations, no pride, no acknowledgement of what I had achieved entirely alone. I expected nothing. I received exactly that." The morning I left, I packed 17 years of my life into 2 suitcases. My mother handed me a $20 bill. "For the taxi," she said. She didn't hug me. Victoria was still asleep. My father had already left for work without saying goodbye. I stood on the doorstep of the house I had lived in my entire life, and no one watched me go. No one stood at the window. No one called out my name. I didn't cry. I had stopped crying for them years ago. The taxi took me to the airport. The $20 bill crumpled in my pocket like an afterthought. But in my carry-on, I held documents that could destroy a family. Instructions from a grandmother who had seen me when no one else did, and the promise of $47 million waiting in a vault in Geneva. I flew to Boston with 2 suitcases and a secret fortune. No one in my family knew what I carried. No one knew what I was about to become. I was 18 years old and I was done being invisible. The next time they saw me, they wouldn't be able to look away. Boston in September smelled like possibility. The campus spread out before me like a world I had earned entirely on my own. My dorm room was small, but it had a window that faced east, and every morning I woke to sunlight instead of shadows. For the first time in my life, the space around me belonged to me. Not assigned as punishment, not given as an afterthought, chosen. No one at Boston University knew I was a Whitmore. No one knew about the basement or the blame or the brother I had lost. They just saw a quiet girl with sharp focus and a work ethic that bordered on obsession. That anonymity was its own kind of freedom. I could be anyone. I could become anything. I lived 2 lives from the very first day. The public version was simple. Scholarship student, library job, modest apartment when I moved off campus sophomore year. I ate cheap meals and wore clothes from thrift stores and never once touched the $47 million waiting for me in Geneva. That money wasn't for survival. It was for war. And wars required patience. The private version was different. Every night after my classes and my shifts at the library, I studied things that weren't on any syllabus. Finance, real estate law, investment strategies, tax structures. I read every book I could find about building wealth invisibly, about moving money through systems designed to hide it. I was teaching myself to become something my family would never see coming. I kept a photograph of Daniel in my desk drawer. Every morning I looked at it before class. Every night I whispered the same words. "I'm coming for them." Just not yet. It became my prayer, my promise, The reason to keep going when the loneliness pressed against my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. The loneliness was the hardest part. I had no friends because I couldn't afford the vulnerability of letting someone in. No relationships because my heart was too full of grief and rage to hold anything softer. I was 20 years old, and I had already decided that everything in my life would serve a single purpose. Everything else was distraction. Then I met Marcus Chen, and everything changed. He came to Boston University as a guest lecturer in my junior year, advanced investment strategies, the kind of class most students took for easy credit and promptly forgot. But I sat in the front row and took notes that filled 3 notebooks by the end of his 6-week series. Marcus was 53 years old with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. He had made his fortune in hedge funds and then walked away from Wall Street to become a private investor. He spoke about what he called invisible wealth, fortunes built without fanfare, empires constructed in silence, money that worked in the shadows while its owners lived unremarkable public lives. I understood every word like he was speaking a language I had been born knowing. After his final lecture, I approached him with a question. Not about the material he had covered, about real estate investment in emerging luxury markets. He paused and studied me with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but instead felt like being seen for the first time since Daniel. "That's not a student question," he said. "That's a player question." He handed me a business card. "Office hours are for students. Call me if you're serious about being something else." I called him that night. He tested me for 2 hours. Questions about markets and timing and risk tolerance. Questions about my goals and my timeline and my willingness to wait. When he finally stopped, he was quiet for a long moment. "You're not building a business," he said. "You're building a weapon. I've seen that look before. I didn't deny it. I couldn't. Just make sure when you fire it, you don't miss." Marcus became my true education over the next 2 years. He taught me what business school couldn't, how to move money invisibly, how to structure entities that couldn't be traced, how to acquire properties and companies without anyone knowing who really owned them. His mantra became my religion. Money is loud. Wealth is silent. Be wealthy. He never asked about my past, never probed into why a 20-year-old girl wanted to learn the architecture of hidden power. Some teachers demand your story. Marcus only demanded your commitment. His discretion was a gift I never took for granted. The day I turned 21, I flew to Geneva alone. The bank was everything I had imagined. Marble floors, hushed voices, the weight of old money pressing down from every chandelier. I presented my identification and Eleanor's key and the sealed instructions she had left. A banker in a gray suit led me to a private vault deep in the building's basement. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Your grandmother was very specific," he said. "No one has accessed this since her death. The vault held more than I expected. The $47 million in bearer bonds and liquid assets was confirmed. But there was another envelope, marked in Eleanor's handwriting. For Grace, the truth." I opened it with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Inside was a police report from Daniel's accident, stamped sealed across the cover. Eleanor had attached a handwritten note explaining how she'd obtained it. Bribes, connections. The kind of money that could make official records appear in unofficial hands. The report's conclusion made my vision blur. Break line showed evidence of tampering. Investigation closed at family's request. I sat in that vault for an hour reading and rereading those words. Break line tampering. My brother didn't lose control. Someone had made sure he would never reach home that night. Someone who knew he was coming. Someone he had told about our phone call. Eleanor's note included one more instruction. "Find the investigating officer when you're ready. He retired to Florida. He'll tell you everything." I wasn't ready. Not yet. But I would be. I returned to Boston with a clarity that felt like ice in my veins. The next 4 years became a blur of strategy and execution. Marcus helped me structure the investment vehicle that would become my weapon. Meridian Holdings. Registered in Dubai. Layered through multiple jurisdictions. My name appeared nowhere in public records. I focused on ultra-luxury real estate in emerging markets, properties the world's wealthy wanted but couldn't easily access. My first acquisition came at 23. A waterfront property in Dubai Marina. $12 million. I renovated it over 6 months and sold it to a Saudi prince for $22 million. Net profit of $8 million in just over a year. I reinvested everything, lived on my Boston salary, ate the same cheap meals, wore the same thrift store clothes. I could have lived in luxury, but instead I lived in preparation. By 25, my portfolio was worth over $300 million. Cash reserves and investments pushed the total past $500 million. I had properties in Dubai and Abu Dhabi and Monaco and the Maldives, a network of contacts and influence that spanned continents. All of it invisible. All of it waiting. I watched Victoria's wedding livestream from my office in Dubai, 63 floors above the city in a penthouse I owned outright. She posted photographs of her nursery when she announced her pregnancy. I studied spreadsheets worth more than her husband's entire net worth. We were building different futures. She just didn't know we were competing. I monitored my family from a distance, hired intelligence gatherers to provide quarterly reports, watched the cracks forming in Whitmore real estate, SEC inquiries, whispered investigations, Richard's signature appearing on documents that shouldn't exist. The empire was eating itself and I hadn't lifted a finger. My mother sent me a letter when I was 26, the first real communication in years. Rambling, nostalgic, hints of regret without actual apology. "I think about you sometimes," she wrote. "I hope you're doing well. Maybe we could have lunch when you're back in Connecticut." I laughed out loud in my empty apartment. The last time I was in Connecticut, I slept in a basement and no one remembered my birthday. Now I owned more property than her husband's entire company. But she still thought I was the one who should come to her. I didn't respond. Some doors stay closed until you're ready to walk through them armed. Then the email arrived that changed everything. 25 years old, late night in Dubai. An encrypted message from an address I didn't recognize. No subject line, just an attachment. The police report from Daniel's accident, the same one Eleanor had given me. But this version had additional pages. Unredacted, a witness statement that had been removed from the official record. Someone had seen a man near Daniel's car before he left the restaurant that night. Tall, dark hair, well-dressed. The witness had been paid $50,000 to stay silent. The payment traced to a company called Brooks Capital Partners, Nolan's company. I read the name 3 times. Nolan hadn't just been involved in the cover-up. He had paid for the silence himself, which meant Victoria's husband had arranged my brother's murder. And someone out there wanted me to know. The email had no signature, just one line at the bottom. "It's time." 3 days after receiving that anonymous email, I made a decision that would set everything in motion. For 7 years, I had been watching and waiting and building. The email changed the equation. Passive observation was no longer enough. It was time to start hunting. I flew to New York on a Thursday morning. Cash payment for everything. No paper trail, no digital footprint. I had learned from Marcus that the most dangerous moves were the ones no one saw coming. This would be the most dangerous move of my life. Frank DeLuca operated out of a small office in Brooklyn. Former FBI. 23 years investigating white-collar crime before he retired and went private. Marcus had recommended him with words that carried weight. If there's dirt, Frank finds it. If there's a body, Frank finds who buried it. He was 62 years old with a face that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. Gray hair cropped short, eyes that assessed me the moment I walked through his door. He didn't offer coffee or small talk. He just waited for me to explain why a young woman with expensive clothes and cheap shoes had traveled across the country to sit in his cluttered office. I laid everything out. Daniel's death, the sealed police report, Nolan's payment to the witness, the financial crimes my brother had discovered before someone decided he needed to disappear. Frank listened without expression, took notes in handwriting so small it looked like code, asked questions that were precise and surgical. "You want me to prove your brother was murdered," he said when I finished, "and identify who ordered it. I want the truth. All of it, no matter where it leads." He studied me for a long moment. "The truth usually leads somewhere ugly, Miss Whitmore. You sure you want to go there? I've been living in ugly my whole life. I just want to know its real name." Frank nodded slowly. Something shifted in his expression. Not sympathy, recognition. "I've had a lot of clients wanting revenge," he said. "Most of them aren't ready for what they find." He paused. "But you're different. You've got the look of someone who's already made peace with burning it all down." He wasn't wrong. I had made that peace years ago in a basement room that smelled like mildew and forgotten children. 3 months later, Frank called me to a secure location in Manhattan, a hotel room with no windows and walls thick enough to swallow secrets. He had a file 3 inches thick and a face that told me the contents would change everything. He started with the witness, the valet from the restaurant where Daniel had dinner the night he died. Frank had tracked him to Portugal, where he'd been living on the $50,000 that bought his silence. The man was still afraid after all these years, but 50,000 more, and the promise of anonymity loosened his tongue. He saw someone tampering with Daniel's car in the parking garage. Tall, dark hair, well-dressed. The description matched Nolan Brooks exactly. The valet was approached the next day, given cash, given a warning: "If you talk, you'll end up like him." Then Frank showed me the phone records, the timeline that proved everything. Daniel called me at 9:47 that night, told me he was coming home. At 10:03 he made another call, to our father. The call lasted 4 minutes, long enough for Daniel to tell Richard what he had discovered about the embezzlement, long enough to give his father one chance to do the right thing. Richard's response was not to confess. At 10:07 he called Nolan. Nolan left the restaurant at 10:09. 17 minutes before Daniel walked to his car, enough time to reach the parking garage, enough time to tamper with the brakes, and then the call that sealed it. Richard to Nolan at 11:42, after the accident was reported. The call lasted 8 seconds, long enough for 2 words. "It's done." Frank's voice was flat as he delivered the verdict. "Your brother called your father to give him a chance to confess. Your father called his future son-in-law instead." I asked the only question that mattered. Did my father know what Nolan was going to do? Frank slid a document across the table, the phone records with timestamps highlighted. Richard called Nolan again after the accident, he said. 8 seconds. It's done. Your father didn't just cover up your brother's murder, he ordered it. I sat in that hotel room for a long time after Frank left. The evidence spread across the table like pieces of a puzzle I had been assembling my entire adult life. My father, the man who put me in a basement and blamed me for Daniel's death. He had ordered that death himself. The weeks that followed brought more revelations. I watched from Dubai as the Whitmore empire began to crack from the inside. The SEC launched a formal investigation into the company. Allegations of fraudulent accounting and embezzlement, and misrepresentation to investors. Richard's face appeared on business news looking haggard and defensive. The man who had built his identity on power and control was watching it slip through his fingers. But the real threat wasn't the SEC, it was Nolan. While Richard fought to save his reputation, Nolan was quietly consolidating power. Board members aligned themselves with the younger man. Victoria supported her husband without question, or perhaps without understanding. Nolan positioned himself as the clean successor, the one who could save the company from Richard's mistakes. My father had killed his son to protect his empire. Now that empire was being stolen by the killer himself. The snake he'd invited into the garden was swallowing him whole. I read the headlines on a Tuesday morning. Whitmore real estate CEO steps back. Son-in-law named acting president. My father had murdered his heir to keep his throne. Now he was losing it anyway to the man who had held the knife. Karma, I thought, has a sense of humor, but I wasn't laughing. I was taking notes. Then Marcus called with news that turned my satisfaction to ice. Someone's been asking questions about Meridian Holdings. His voice was tense in a way I had never heard before. Professional inquiries. Forensic accountant level. They're getting close, Grace. The Dubai real estate community was small at the top. Rumors had begun spreading about the mysterious owner who had built an empire in 7 years. Someone with resources was trying to connect the dots. Nolan had hired an investigator. He was looking for threats. And I had apparently become one. I needed protection, legal, strategic, personal. That's when Tessa Morgan entered my life. She was 38 years old, Harvard Law, former federal prosecutor. Now in private practice representing clients who needed someone brilliant and ruthless and absolutely loyal. We met in London on neutral ground. She reviewed my situation with eyes that missed nothing. "You've built something remarkable," she said. "But you're also sitting on a powder keg. One wrong move and Nolan finds you before you're ready." She became my shield, created additional layers of protection for Meridian Holdings, prepared contingency plans for every scenario. When you decide to move, she told me you need to move fast and move hard. No second chances. Then she slid a document across the table. Surveillance photographs. Me. Entering my Dubai building, at the Geneva Bank, having coffee with Marcus. Nolan's investigator took these last month. He doesn't know who you are yet. But he knows you exist. The clock is ticking, Grace. I looked at my own face in those photographs. The ghost was becoming visible. I needed to decide. Hide deeper or step into the light. The decision was made for me 2 weeks later. A birthday card arrived at my Boston post office box. My 27th birthday. The first acknowledgement from my mother in over a decade, handwritten in her careful script. "I think about you more than you know. I'm sorry for so many things. Maybe we could talk someday. No specifics, no confession. Just the fog of guilt, without the clarity of accountability." She wasn't sorry for what she had done. She was sorry for how it made her feel. I kept the card, not out of sentiment, out of evidence. Every crack in their armor was a potential entry point. Even my mother's guilt could be useful. Especially my mother's guilt. She knew things. She had stayed silent for 10 years. And silence, I had learned, was just another form of confession waiting to be extracted. 2 weeks after the birthday card, another envelope arrived. This one embossed and expensive. Victoria's 35th birthday celebration. Black tie, Greenwich Estate. 200 guests. A handwritten note was tucked inside. "Grace, it's been too long. Mom has been asking about you. We'd love to have the whole family together for once. Let's put the past behind us. Victoria." I read it 3 times. Victoria didn't want reconciliation. Victoria wanted something. The timing was too perfect, right when Nolan was hunting for the Meridian owner, right when the family was cracking under pressure. This wasn't an invitation, it was reconnaissance. I called Tessa that night. "I'm going. You know it's a trap," she said. "I'm counting on it. Traps work both ways." I hung up the phone and looked out at the Dubai skyline, the empire I had built in silence waiting for this exact moment. Victoria thought she was summoning the basement ghost to humiliate her one more time. She didn't know she was inviting a hurricane. I had 2 weeks to prepare, 2 weeks to gather everything I needed, 2 weeks before I walked back into that house and showed them exactly who I had become. 14 days until Victoria's 35th birthday. I pinned the invitation to the wall of my Dubai penthouse and studied it every morning like a battle map. The embossed lettering, the elegant script, the casual cruelty of a sister who thought she was summoning a ghost to humiliate. She had no idea what was coming. I spent those 2 weeks preparing for war, not with weapons that drew blood, with weapons that drew truth. Frank's complete investigative file was copied and secured in 3 separate locations. Phone records, witness statements, payment trails, the sealed police report proving brake line tampering. Every piece of evidence that could destroy the men who murdered my brother. Tessa worked around the clock preparing legal documents, cease and desist letters, evidence packets formatted for authorities, emergency filings ready to submit at a moment's notice. We mapped every possible scenario, every potential countermove, every way they might try to silence me before I could speak. I wasn't going to that party to make a scene. I was going to plant seeds that would grow into a forest fire. Marcus asked me once what my endgame was. I told him I want them to know that I know. I want to watch the fear enter their eyes. And then I want to walk out while they're still processing that the ghost they forgot is the one who's been haunting them all along. Tessa nodded slowly when I said it. That's not revenge, she said. That's art. 10 days before the party, I flew to Milan. One appointment. Valentino Garavani's private atelier. A custom gown commission that would cost more than most people's annual salary. Black silk. Hand embroidered. The kind of dress that commands attention without asking for it. I knew exactly what I was doing. Victoria had posted about this designer years ago. A photograph of a gown she desperately wanted but couldn't afford. Someday she wrote beneath the image with a string of longing emojis. I remembered that post. Saved it. Filed it away for a moment exactly like this one. Someday had arrived. Just not for her. The fitting took 3 hours. I stood in front of a 3-way mirror while the seamstress made adjustments with pins and chalk. The dress fit like armor. Elegant and understated and absolutely devastating. She asked if it was for a special occasion. I smiled and told her a family reunion. She didn't need to know that reunions could be battlefields. I retrieved Eleanor's jewelry from the Geneva vault the same week. The pieces she had hidden from my father. The originals he never knew existed. A diamond pendant she wore in her wedding portrait. The same pendant that should have gone to me in the public will, but Richard had kept it and given it to Victoria instead. What no one knew was that Eleanor had commissioned duplicates decades ago. Victoria had been wearing the copy to every major event for years. I would wear the original. Let her wonder why my diamonds caught the light differently than hers. Some messages don't need words, they just need the right illumination. The dress cost $62,000. Victoria's engagement ring had cost $47,000. I knew because she posted about that too, showing off what she called a family heirloom from the Brooks collection. She had no idea I was counting everything, measuring everything, preparing to show her exactly how much the forgotten sister had outgrown her shadow. 1 week before the party, Frank delivered his final intelligence report. He flew to Dubai personally. The kind of information he carried wasn't safe on any network. Nolan was negotiating to sell Whitmore real estate. Not a merger, a complete sale to a foreign investment group. The deal was already in its final stages. Signatures pending. Richard had no idea it was happening. The board was aligned with Nolan. The SEC investigation had weakened Richard's position so badly that no one needed his approval anymore. The deal would make Nolan wealthy independent of the family legacy. Victoria would become rich in her own right, and Richard would be left with nothing, pushed out of his own company by the man he had trusted with murder. Frank handed me a single page, the signature sheet for the sale agreement. Nolan had already signed. The buyer had signed. Only Richard's signature was missing and they weren't planning to ask for it. They're going to force him out and sell without him, Frank said. Your father is about to lose everything he killed for. I looked at the document for a long moment. Good, I said, but not before I take what's left. 5 days before the party, Tessa called on an encrypted line. Her voice was tight with urgency. We have a problem. Someone from Whitmore's legal team contacted my office. They were asking about Meridian Holdings, its ownership structure, its principal investor. Nolan's forensic accountant had traced a connection, not to me directly, but close. The inquiry mentioned a female principal, late 20s, American. They were looking at Dubai property records, Geneva banking connections. One more thread pulled and my identity would unravel. If they find you before the party, you lose the element of surprise, Tessa said. Then we need to make sure they don't find me for 5 more days. She deployed every shield we had prepared. Legal letters threatening action over privacy violations. Marcus activated his network to create misdirection, false trails leading nowhere. I went dark completely. No public appearances. No traceable communications. 5 days of absolute silence before the storm. I had lived invisible for 18 years. I could manage 5 more days. Tessa sent me the inquiry letter Nolan's attorney had written. At the bottom was a handwritten note. Client believes subject may have family connection to Whitmore. Urgent priority, family connection. He suspected, but he didn't know. Not yet. The question was whether he would figure it out before I walked through that door or after. 3 days before the party, my phone rang with a Greenwich area code. My mother's number. I almost didn't answer. Something made me pause. Some instinct I couldn't name. I picked up. Catherine's voice was thin and tired and uncertain. "Grace, please don't hang up. I need to talk to you." She spoke quickly, nervously, like she was afraid of being overheard. "I know you're coming to the party," Victoria told me. "I wanted to warn you. Things aren't what they seem." She talked in fragments. Richard had changed. Victoria was different. Nolan frightened her. "I've made so many mistakes, Grace. With you, with Daniel, with everything." It was the first time she had spoken Daniel's name to me in a decade. "What do you mean, mistakes with Daniel?" My voice was steady even as my heart pounded. A long pause, her breathing heavy on the line. "I can't say it over the phone. But I know things I should have said years ago." "Then say them. Not like this." "At the party. Find me alone, in the garden. I'll tell you everything." The line went dead. I sat with the phone in my hand for 10 minutes after she hung up. My mother had never reached out like that, never sounded scared, never mentioned Daniel. Either she was setting a trap, or she was ready to betray the people she had protected for 10 years. Both possibilities meant the same thing. The cracks weren't just showing anymore, the walls were coming down. 2 days before the party, I packed my bags. The dress hung in a garment bag like a weapon waiting to be deployed. Evidence files secured in my carry-on. Eleanor's pendant in a velvet box against my chest. I was ready, or as ready as anyone could be to walk back into the house that had tried to erase them. That night at midnight, my secure phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "I know what you're planning. I can help. Meet me at the greenhouse at midnight during the party. Come alone. I have what Daniel wanted you to have." The message was signed with a single initial. D. My blood went cold. D. Daniel. But Daniel had been dead for 10 years. Someone was using his initial. Someone who knew him. Someone who claimed to have something he had left behind. A trap? An ally? A ghost reaching across the grave to help me finish what he started? There was only one way to know. Walk into that greenhouse and find out. I typed back 3 words. "I'll be there." Then I deleted the message and finished packing. Whatever was waiting in that greenhouse, I intended to be ready. Whatever secrets still remained after 10 years of silence, I intended to drag them into the light. Victoria thought she was throwing a birthday party. She didn't know she was hosting a reckoning. The black car wound through Greenwich as twilight settled over Connecticut. I sat in the back seat watching familiar streets pass like memories I had tried to bury. The Valentino dress pressed against my skin like armor. Eleanor's diamond pendant rested against my collarbone, warm from my pulse. 10 years since I had seen this driveway. 10 years since I had walked these grounds as the ghost no one remembered to look for. The estate appeared through the trees exactly as I remembered it. Every window glowing. Every inch of the grounds manicured to perfection. The colonial architecture that had once made me feel small now looked like a stage set waiting for its final act. Valet parking attendants in crisp uniforms. Catering trucks lined up like soldiers. A string quartet warming up somewhere inside. 200 guests expected tonight. Greenwich elite, business partners, society names that appeared in magazines and charity announcements. The same people who had attended events at this house my entire childhood without ever knowing a girl lived in the basement. The car stopped at the entrance. I took one breath, then another. Then I opened the door and stepped out into the night air. Photographers waited at the entrance. Victoria had hired press coverage for her 35th birthday. Of course she had. Everything about my sister required an audience. A flash went off as I approached the door. Then another. I didn't flinch, didn't smile, just walked toward the entrance like I owned the ground beneath my feet. The last time I walked through this door, I was 18 with 2 suitcases and a $20 bill. Now I was 27 with a fortune they couldn't imagine and evidence that could destroy them all. The valet asked for my name. I said it clearly. Grace Whitmore. Watching his face for recognition. There was none. They had forgotten me so completely they didn't even remember what forgetting looked like. The grand foyer opened before me, marble floors gleaming, crystal chandelier casting prismatic light across walls lined with paintings worth more than most houses. The smell of expensive perfume and fresh flowers and old money pretending it had always been there. Richard saw me first. My father stood near the bar with a drink in his hand and a smile frozen on his face from whatever conversation he had just abandoned. The smile died when our eyes met. Confusion flickered across his features. Then recognition. Then something that looked almost like fear. He had aged badly in 10 years. The SEC investigation had carved deep lines around his eyes. His hair was grayer, his shoulders hunched slightly like a man expecting a blow. He didn't approach me, just stared, like he was seeing a ghost he had worked very hard to bury. Catherine stood by the fireplace with champagne she wasn't drinking. When she saw me, her hand trembled so badly the glass nearly slipped from her fingers. She mouthed something I couldn't hear across the crowded room. "You came." But she didn't move toward me, didn't smile, didn't do anything except stand there with tears forming in eyes that had refused to look at me for a decade. The woman who told me it should have been you looked like she was seeing a judgment she had been dreading for years. Then Victoria made her entrance. She descended the main staircase in a white gown that probably cost what some people earned in a year. The birthday queen commanding attention from every corner of the room. Her eyes swept across the crowd, accepting adoration like oxygen. Then they found me. She froze for half a second, just long enough for me to see the shock register. Then the mask slid into place, bright smile, arms extended, voice carrying across the room like she was performing for the photographers. Grace, you actually came. Everyone, my little sister, finally decided to join us. The emphasis on little, diminishing me even as she embraced me. The hug was cold and performative, a show for the cameras. But when she pulled back, her eyes told a different story. Calculating, assessing, afraid of something she couldn't quite name. Her diamond necklace caught the light as she stepped away. I recognized it immediately. Grandmother Eleanor's pendant, the one that was supposed to be mine. The one Victoria had worn to every important event for years, believing it made her special. She didn't know she was wearing a copy. The real one was warm against my skin. Beautiful necklace, Victoria. I said it casually, like an observation, like nothing. Her hand flew to her throat. It was grandmother's. She said it defensively, like I had accused her of something. I know. I smiled. I know exactly what it's worth. Something flickered in her eyes. Uncertainty, the beginning of understanding that something was different. That the basement ghost had returned wearing armor she couldn't identify. Nolan appeared at her side before she could respond. Victoria's husband, Daniel's killer. The man who had smiled while threatening my brother's life and then made sure he never reached home. He looked exactly as I remembered. Polished, handsome in that calculated way. Eyes that assessed everything and everyone for advantage. When he saw me, those eyes lit with something that wasn't surprise, interest, appetite, like a predator who had finally cornered prey he had been hunting. Grace. He said my name like he was tasting it. What a wonderful surprise. His hand found my lower back as he leaned in to kiss my cheek. Too close, too familiar, too deliberate. You look expensive tonight. Did you finally find yourself a rich husband? I stepped back from his touch. Something like that. The party swirled around me for the next 2 hours. I moved through conversations like water through cracks, answering questions vaguely, watching everyone watching me. The whispers followed wherever I went. Is that the other daughter? Didn't she disappear years ago? I heard she lives overseas now. A woman I didn't recognize approached me near the bar, drunk on champagne and gossip. You must be the mysterious sister. Victoria talks about you sometimes, says you were always the difficult one." I took a sip of water. Did she? How interesting. What else did she say? The woman leaned closer. "That you blamed yourself for your brother's death. So sad. Survivor's guilt is terrible." I set down my glass carefully. That is sad. But survival isn't what I feel guilty about. Her smile faltered. She didn't understand. She would eventually. Everyone would. Nolan found me on the terrace just before midnight, away from the crowd, away from witnesses, the music muffled by distance and stone walls. "Let's take a walk," he said. "You and I should catch up." It wasn't a request. I followed him into the garden knowing exactly what was coming. "You've done well for yourself, Grace." His voice dropped once we were alone. Dubai wasn't it. Real estate. The question wasn't innocent. He knew. "You've been looking into me. I look into everyone who might affect my interests." He stepped closer. "Old habit. And what have you found?" His eyes glittered in the moonlight. "I found gaps. Mysteries. A very wealthy woman who appeared from nowhere." He paused. "I also found that you've been asking questions. About Daniel. About things that should stay buried. Should they?" His hand closed around my elbow. Not hard. Just enough to communicate threat. "Some graves are better left closed, Grace. For everyone's sake, including yours." I met his eyes without flinching. "Thank you for the advice. Here's some in return. Be careful which graves you try to keep closed. Some of them have a way of opening themselves." I pulled my arm free and walked back toward the house. I felt his eyes on me the entire way. Hunting, calculating, beginning to understand that the ghost he had dismissed for 10 years had become something much more dangerous. At 11:47, I slipped away from the party, through the garden, past the rose beds, to the greenhouse at the edge of the property where someone who signed their name with my dead brother's initial was waiting. The door creaked when I pushed it open. The smell of earth and growing things washed over me. Orchids lined the walls. Moonlight filtered through the glass panels. A man stood with his back to me. Silver hair. Familiar posture. He turned when he heard my footsteps. "Marcus Chen." "Hello, Grace." His voice was soft in the darkness. "I'm glad you came." Understanding crashed through me like a wave. "You sent the email. The police report with the unredacted pages." "I did. Why? How do you have this?" Marcus stepped closer. His face held old grief and old guilt and something that looked like relief. "Because Daniel was my friend. My business partner before you ever knew me. And the night before he died, he called me with instructions. If anything happens to me, find Grace. Give her everything. Help her become strong enough to finish what I started." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small flash drive. "Daniel made this the night before he died. A video, his insurance policy, what's on it, his testimony. Everything he knew, names, dates, amounts." Marcus pressed the drive into my palm. And something else. A recording of Nolan admitting the plan. Daniel had the room bugged. Nolan didn't know. "It's all there, Grace." His voice confessing, your father's voice agreeing, everything you need to destroy them both. I stared at the small device in my hand. 10 years of waiting, 10 years of building, and now the weapon that could end everything they had stolen from me. "Why did you wait so long to give this to me?" "Because you weren't ready. You needed to be strong enough to survive what comes next." Daniel knew that. He made me promise to wait until you were. I closed my fingers around the flash drive. "I'm ready now." "Yes." Marcus nodded slowly. "I believe you are." I returned to the party at 12:23. The flash drive hidden in my clutch next to the small canister of pepper spray I carried everywhere. The party was reaching its peak, champagne flowing, music swelling, 200 people celebrating a woman who didn't deserve celebration. Victoria stood on the small stage near the band. Microphone in hand, glass raised. Everyone, may I have your attention?" The room quieted. 200 faces turned toward the birthday queen. I want to thank you all for being here. This has been such a special night. Her eyes swept the crowd and found me standing near the bar. Locked on. Something shifted in her expression. Triumph replacing performance. And now. She smiled that razor-thin smile I had known my entire life. I'd like to address someone who shouldn't be here. The room went still. Every eye followed her gaze to where I stood. Alone, illuminated, the ghost finally visible. My little sister Grace, who we haven't seen in 10 years, who left this family and never looked back. The crowd murmured. Victoria raised her glass higher. I think it's time everyone knew the truth about my sister, about what she did, about why she really left. I stood perfectly still. The flash drive warm against my hip, Daniel's voice waiting inside it. Victoria thought she was about to humiliate me in front of 200 people. She thought she was going to tell her version of the truth. I was about to show them the real one. 200 faces turned toward me. The silence spread through the ballroom like a held breath. Victoria stood on the stage in her white dress with the microphone in her hand and triumph in her eyes. She had waited 10 years for this moment, the moment she could destroy me in front of everyone who mattered. My sister left this family 10 years ago, right after our brother Daniel died. Victoria's voice carried perfectly. Practiced, polished, poisonous. What most of you don't know is why she left, why she ran. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I felt the weight of their stares. Pity, judgment, curiosity. The narrative was being written in real time, and Victoria was holding the pen. Grace blamed herself for Daniel's death. She called him that night, distracted him, made him drive when he shouldn't have. Victoria dabbed at her eyes with a cocktail napkin. The performance was flawless. The guilt was too much for her. She couldn't face us. She couldn't face what she had done. Some guests nodded sympathetically, others whispered behind their hands. I stood perfectly still near the bar and let the words wash over me like waves against stone. I had heard these accusations for 10 years. They had lost their power to wound me. They had only strengthened my resolve. Victoria continued with the confidence of someone who believed she had already won. I've spent 10 years hoping my sister would heal, would come home, would find peace. Her voice cracked artfully, but instead she's been hiding, building some mysterious life overseas, never calling, never caring. Her smile sharpened into something cruel. So I have to ask Grace, why are you really here tonight? What do you want from us? 200 people waited for my answer. I gave them silence. Silence was what I had been trained in. Silence right now was louder than anything I could say. Richard stepped forward from the crowd. My father's face was flushed with champagne and old rage. He took the microphone from Victoria with the authority of a patriarch defending his kingdom. My daughter is right. Grace has always been troubled. His voice filled the room. We gave her everything, a home, an education, a family, and she threw it all away. The lie was so smooth, it sounded like truth. I watched him deliver it and thought about the phone records in my clutch. The 8-second call after Daniel died. The 2 words that proved everything. It's done. Nolan appeared beside Victoria, his arm wrapped around her shoulders in a display of protective concern. We're just worried about her, honestly. His voice dripped with manufactured sincerity. She's been making strange accusations, digging into the past. Some people can't let go of tragedy. They need someone to blame. The implication landed exactly as intended. Grace was unstable, obsessed, dangerous. The 3 of them stood united on that stage. Father, daughter, son-in-law, a wall of lies dressed in evening wear. I looked for my mother. Catherine stood frozen by the fireplace, tears streaming down her face. But she didn't speak, didn't defend me, didn't move. The woman who had promised to tell me the truth in the garden couldn't even open her mouth when it mattered. She had chosen silence again. the same silence she had kept for 10 years. The room waited. Victoria's smile widened. She thought I would crumble, thought I would run, thought I would prove every word she had spoken by breaking down in front of 200 witnesses. I straightened my spine, lifted my chin, spoke clearly enough for every person in that room to hear. "Are you finished?" Victoria's smile flickered. This wasn't the reaction she expected, wasn't the broken girl she remembered. I took a step forward, toward the light, toward them. "You've told your story, the one you've rehearsed for 10 years, the one that makes you the victims and me the villain." My voice didn't waver. I had waited too long to let it waver now. But stories have a way of changing when all the facts come out. Richard's face darkened. Fear flickered behind the rage. "What's that supposed to mean?" Victoria demanded an answer. "What are you talking about, Grace?" I looked at my father directly. The man who had put me in a basement. Blamed me for a murder he ordered. Stolen my childhood and my brother and my belief that families were supposed to protect each other. It means I know what really happened to Daniel. I know who was responsible. And soon everyone else will too. The room erupted in gasps. Whispers exploded like small fires spreading through dry grass. Richard's composure shattered. Whatever mask he had been wearing for 50 years cracked down the middle. He crossed the space between us in 3 strides. His hand connected with my face before I could react. The sound echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. Sharp, brutal, unmistakable. My head turned with the force of the blow. I tasted copper where my teeth cut the inside of my cheek. The sting radiated across my skin like fire. And somewhere in the stunned silence a camera flash went off. Capturing the exact moment Richard Whitmore struck his daughter in front of 200 witnesses. I didn't fall, didn't cry, didn't raise my hand to my cheek. I straightened slowly, turned to face the room. Let them see the blood on my lip. Let them see the bruise already forming. Let them see exactly what kind of man my father really was. Victoria's triumph had curdled into horror, her mouth hung open. Her perfect birthday party had become a crime scene. Nolan's face was pale. His confident smile had vanished. Richard stood with his hand still raised and his chest heaving. The realization of what he had done spreading across his features like a stain. His palm connected with my cheek so hard I saw stars. The room gasped as one, a collective intake of breath that sounded like the ocean pulling back before a wave. I tasted blood. I felt the sting radiating across my face. And I thought perfect. The photographer had captured it. Richard Whitmore, patriarch and pillar of society, striking his daughter in front of 200 witnesses. He had just handed me a weapon more powerful than anything on that flash drive. His rage, his violence, his loss of control. For the first time in my life, my father had given me exactly what I needed. I touched my lip, looked at the blood on my fingertips. The room remained frozen, guests, family, staff, all waiting to see what the beaten daughter would do next. "I came here tonight to give you a chance." My voice was steady, my eyes were dry, to see if anything had changed. I looked at Richard, at Victoria, at Nolan, each in turn, measuring them, memorizing their faces. "It hasn't. You're exactly who you've always been." I picked up my clutch from the bar, walked toward the door. My heels clicked against the marble floor, the only sound in a room full of silent witnesses. At the threshold, I paused, turned back one final time. "I'll see you all very soon." "Sooner than you think." Victoria's voice cracked with desperation. "What does that mean?" "Grace, what are you going to do?" I didn't answer. I walked out into the Connecticut night with my head held high and blood still wet on my lip. Behind me the chaos erupted, voices raised, accusations flying, Richard being ushered away by men in suits. I heard none of it. The night air was cold and clean. The stars overhead were indifferent to the drama below, indifferent to the girl who had finally stopped being invisible. I sat in my car for exactly 7 minutes, Not crying, not shaking, counting the years I had waited, the nights I had planned, the evidence I had gathered, counting the seconds until I could begin. My phone buzzed. Tessa. I saw the photos. They're already online. Are you okay? I typed back. I'm perfect. It's time. Make the call. 3 dots appeared, then her response. Which call? I smiled. Tasted blood. All of them. The call connected. Tessa's voice was sharp with readiness. What do you need? Buy Nujuma. Both properties. Wire the funds tonight. A pause. That's 100 million, Grace. I know exactly what it is. The news will hit by morning. Everyone will know someone just made the biggest private real estate purchase of the year. That's the point. They'll figure out it's you, eventually. But by then it won't matter. By then I'll have released everything. I outlined the next steps. The recording would go to journalists, the evidence to the SEC and the police. Tessa would prepare the legal filings. Frank would coordinate with his media contacts. Marcus would handle the business community. In 48 hours, my family's empire would be dust. And I would be standing on an island they couldn't afford to dream about. Are you sure about this? Tessa asked. Once this starts, there's no going back. Your family will be destroyed. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My cheek was already swelling. My lip was split. But my eyes were clear. Clearer than they had ever been. My family destroyed themselves 10 years ago when they chose money over their own son. I'm just making sure the world knows the truth. I ended the call and started the engine. The Greenwich estate disappeared in my mirrors. The house where I had been forgotten. The family who had blamed me for a murder they committed. The sister who had smiled at my brother's funeral. I never looked back. The wire confirmation arrived at 6:47 in the morning. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of a Manhattan hotel suite, watching the city wake up below. The sun painted the skyline gold. My phone displayed the words I had been waiting a decade to see. Funds transferred, properties secured, $100 million, 2 mansions on Nujuma Island, paid in full. I read the confirmation 3 times. Not because I doubted it, because I wanted to memorize the feeling. 27 years old. Standing in a penthouse suite. A bruise forming on my cheek where my father's hand had connected. A split lip healing where his violence had drawn blood. But inside I felt nothing but clarity. The basement ghost had purchased islands. The forgotten daughter had become unforgettable. I had spent 10 years building toward this moment. Now that it was here, I felt no triumph, no celebration. Just the quiet certainty of a woman who knew exactly what came next. Today, the world would learn the truth. Today, my family would learn who I had become. I looked at my reflection in the window. The Manhattan skyline ghosted through my face like a double exposure. The bruise on my cheek was purple and blue, a perfect handprint. I didn't cover it. Didn't want to. Every interview, every photograph, every appearance today would show what Richard Whitmore had done to his daughter. His violence would be my introduction. His mistake would be my megaphone. By 8 in the morning, the news alerts flooded my phone like a breaking dam. Whitmore family scandal. Father assaults daughter at birthday gala. The headline appeared on every news site I checked. The photograph of Richard slapping me had gone viral overnight. Twitter, Instagram, news networks, morning shows. Everyone was talking about the moment a patriarch lost control in front of 200 witnesses. The comments poured in faster than anyone could read them. That poor woman who hits their own daughter. The Whitmores are monsters. The narrative Victoria had crafted for a decade was crumbling in hours. I wasn't the troubled runaway anymore. I was the victim of an abusive family. The internet had decided. The court of public opinion had rendered its verdict. But that was only half the story. Mystery buyer snaps. Up to Nujuma Island mansions for $100 million. The financial news buzzed with speculation about the anonymous purchaser. Who has that kind of cash for a same-day wire? Real estate analysts guessed at possibilities. Tech billionaire, Saudi royal, Russian oligarch. No one imagined the truth. No one thought to connect the beaten daughter to the record-breaking deal. They were looking for a titan. They didn't think to look for a ghost. By 9, my face was on every news channel in America. The photograph of the slap played on loop. Commentators analyzed my expression. Notice how she doesn't flinch. Look at her composure. This woman has been through this before. They didn't know how right they were. They didn't know about the basement or the silence or the years of invisible violence. But they were about to learn. Everyone was about to learn everything. My phone showed 47 missed calls from Victoria by mid-morning. The voicemails progressed through stages of grief that had nothing to do with sorrow. First message. Grace, call me back. We need to talk about damage control. Middle messages. This is insane. You're ruining everything. What do you want? Final message. You think you've won something. You have no idea what you've started. I saved every recording. Evidence of consciousness. Evidence of fear. Richard didn't call after his first attempt at 6 a.m. His lawyers called instead. 12 times. Threats wrapped in legal language. Defamation, harassment, restraining orders. I forwarded every message to Tessa. Let them threaten, let them bluster, paper shields against a coming flood. Then Nolan texted from a burner phone at 10:30. I know you have something. Whatever Daniel gave you, it's not what you think. Meet me, let me explain. I didn't respond. An hour later. I can make things very difficult for you, Grace. Your Dubai business, your investors, your reputation. Still nothing. His final text arrived at 11:47. I'm begging you, think about Victoria, think about your mother. If you release whatever you have, you won't just destroy me and your father, you'll destroy them too. I read it twice. He was right. Victoria and Catherine would suffer. The family name would become ash. Everything they had built would collapse. I thought about it for exactly 30 seconds. Then I remembered Daniel's face. The basement. My mother saying it should have been you. 10 years of blame for a crime I didn't commit. 10 years of silence from people who knew the truth. I typed back one message. I've thought about them for 10 years. It's time someone thought about Daniel. Then I blocked the number. Tessa arrived at 11 with 2 leather briefcases and the expression of someone preparing for war. Everything's ready, she said. Are you sure you want to do this? I've been sure for 10 years. The email was composed with surgical precision, every piece of evidence attached in proper order. Daniel's original letter exposing the embezzlement, financial documents proving Richard's fraud, the sealed police report showing brake line tampering, witness statements about Nolan at the car, phone records tracing the conspiracy, Frank's complete investigative report connecting every thread. Subject line: what Richard Whitmore doesn't want you to know. Recipients: every board member of Whitmore Real Estate, the SEC Enforcement Division, the Connecticut State Police Cold Case Unit, 3 journalists Frank trusted to tell the story properly, 1 copy to the law firm representing the company. I didn't send it to destroy them. I sent it to tell the truth. That the destruction would follow was simply cause and effect. Tessa looked at me one final time. Once you press send, there's no taking it back. I pressed send. The email left my outbox splitting into dozens of copies, racing toward inboxes across the country, carrying 10 years of secrets with it. I watched the progress bar fill, 100%. Delivered. The truth was free. Within 2 hours, my phone started ringing with unknown numbers. Journalists, board members, investigators. Everyone wanted to talk. Everyone wanted to know if it was true. Did Richard Whitmore really steal from his own mother? Did he really help cover up his son's murder? I didn't answer. The documents spoke for themselves. But Tessa issued one statement on my behalf. My brother Daniel Whitmore was murdered 10 years ago. The evidence has been provided to the appropriate authorities. I ask for privacy while justice is pursued. Privacy. The thing they had never given me. I asked for it now only because I knew they wouldn't get any. At 4 p.m, a journalist at the Wall Street Journal connected the dots that would set the world on fire. The mystery Nujuma buyer, the assault victim, The estranged Whitmore daughter. Same person. Forgotten Whitmore daughter is billionaire real estate mogul. The headline spread across every platform within minutes. Grace Whitmore. From family outcast to $100 million mystery buyer. Journalists dug into Meridian Holdings, the Dubai empire, the Monaco properties, the global portfolio. Estimated net worth over $500 million. Built in 7 years from nothing anyone knew about. The narrative they had written crumbled to dust. Troubled girl, guilty conscience, family embarrassment. None of it held. The woman they had dismissed was richer than her father. The ghost they had forgotten had been building an empire in the shadows. Social media exploded with a new story. The underdog who became a titan, the forgotten sister who built an empire. Think pieces appeared about family abuse and gaslighting and wealth built in silence. Women everywhere shared their own stories of being overlooked and dismissed and blamed. I became a symbol without meaning to. A symbol of survival, of revenge, of reclamation. A reporter tracked down my college roommate from Boston. She told them Grace was the quietest person I ever met. Worked constantly, never went out, never talked about her family. I thought she was just shy. Turns out she was building an empire while we were going to parties. I saw the quote and smiled. The quiet ones. The invisible ones. We're the ones they should have been watching. At 9 that night I sat alone in the hotel suite. The documents were circulating, the identity was revealed. The narrative had shifted completely. One thing remained. Daniel's video. His voice. His truth. I uploaded the file to a private link, sent it to every journalist covering the story, posted it on a new social media account. The caption read, "My brother recorded this the night before he was murdered. It's time the world heard what he had to say." At 9:47 the video went live. Daniel's face filled screens across America. Younger, alive, afraid, his voice. "If you're watching this, something has happened to me. And there are things you need to know about my father, about Nolan Brooks, and about the company that bears our name." I watched the view count climb. 1,000. 10,000. 100,000. Daniel's voice filled my hotel room, speaking from 10 years in the past, explaining everything he had discovered, everything he had feared, everything that had cost him his life. Then came the recording he had made without anyone knowing. Nolan's voice clear as glass. "There are ways to make problems disappear, Daniel. Permanent ways." And my father's response. "The Brooks deal is worth more than one man's principles." By midnight, the video had 10 million views. By morning, Nolan Brooks would be in handcuffs. The truth Daniel died for was finally free. I pressed my palm against the window and watched the city lights blur through my tears. The first tears I had allowed myself in 10 years. "The world knows now," I whispered. "Everyone knows." The video hit 40 million views by sunrise. I watched the counter climb through the night, unable to sleep, unable to look away. Daniel's face filled screens across America, his voice explaining everything he had discovered, everything that had cost him his life. By 3 in the morning, every news network was playing clips on loop. Analysts dissected every word. Commentators debated what it meant. But no one could debate the recording itself. The section that broke the internet wasn't Daniel's testimony. It was what his hidden recording device had captured without anyone knowing. Audio from his home office the night he confronted Nolan about the embezzlement. Nolan's voice was clear and unmistakable. "Daniel, your father and I have worked too hard to let you destroy everything. There are ways to handle this, quiet ways, permanent ways." Daniel's response, "Are you threatening me?" Nolan again, "I'm offering you a choice. Walk away from what you found, or don't walk away at all." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had been burning for 10 years. But the recording continued, and what came next destroyed everything my family had built. Richard's voice entered the conversation. My father, the patriarch, the pillar of Greenwich society. "Nolan's right, Daniel. This is bigger than your conscience. The Brooks deal is worth more than one man's principles." Daniel's voice cracked with disbelief. "One man, I'm your son." Richard's response was cold and final. "Then act like it. Forget what you saw, or deal with the consequences." The recording ended. Daniel died 12 hours later. I had heard these words before. Marcus played them for me in the greenhouse. But hearing them broadcast on national television was different. Hearing my father tell my brother to forget what he saw or deal with the consequences, and knowing Daniel was dead the next morning. That was something I couldn't have prepared for. 40 million people heard those words. 40 million people now knew what kind of man Richard Whitmore really was. At 7 a.m. on day 2, my phone rang. Tessa's voice was sharp with urgency. "Turn on the news. Now." I switched to CNN. Live footage from Greenwich, police cars outside Victoria's home, officers at the door, and then the image that would define everything that followed. Nolan Brooks being led out in handcuffs. He was wearing yesterday's clothes, unshaven, exhausted. The confident predator who had threatened me on the terrace 2 nights ago looked like a man who had finally run out of places to hide. Photographers swarmed, cameras flashed. The perp walk played out on live television for the entire world to witness. The charges scrolled across the bottom of the screen. First-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, additional financial crimes pending, bail denied due to flight risk and substantial resources. I watched him duck into the police car. The same confident smile from their engagement party was gone. In its place was the face of a man who had finally understood that some graves won't stay closed no matter how much money you throw at them. Victoria was visible in the doorway as police led her husband away. She stood frozen with her hand over her mouth, watching the father of her children being arrested for murdering her brother. I wondered what she was feeling: betrayal, shock, or something darker. The realization that she had slept beside a killer for 10 years, worn his ring, carried his name, built a life on a foundation of bones. The cameras caught her face. I saved that image, not out of cruelty, out of record. I was done letting this family rewrite history. By noon, the SEC announced a formal investigation into Whitmore real estate. All assets frozen pending review. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. Richard's lawyer released a statement claiming full cooperation and maintained innocence. No one believed it. The recording was too clear, the evidence too overwhelming. At 4 p.m, Richard Whitmore resigned as CEO. Not voluntarily. The board forced him out. The company he had killed his son to protect was stripping his name from the door. The press conference was carried live on every network. Richard looked like he had aged 10 years in 2 days, gray, hollow, broken. A reporter caught him leaving through a side exit after the announcement. "Mr. Whitmore, did you help plan your son's murder?" Richard's face contorted with rage and shame and terror, all fighting for control. He shoved the microphone away. "I loved my son," he said. But his voice cracked on the word loved, past tense. He had been using past tense for Daniel for 10 years. The world heard it now. The world heard how easily he had let his son become history. I watched from a coffee shop 3 blocks away, the live stream playing on my phone. When the reporter said 25 years to life, I felt something unexpected. Grief. Not for the man he was. For the man he could have been. For the father who might have loved me if he hadn't loved money more. I closed the app and finished my coffee. Some funerals happen while people are still alive. I had just attended my father's. On day 3, Victoria found me. I had moved to a different hotel for security reasons, changed locations every 12 hours, but somehow she tracked me down. The knock came at 10 a.m. Security called up to say a woman was in the lobby, said she was my sister, said she had been crying. I hesitated, then told them to send her up. The door opened and I barely recognized her. Victoria without armor, no makeup, hair unwashed, eyes swollen from days of tears, designer clothes wrinkled and stained. The golden child looked like she had walked through a war and lost everything she thought she was fighting for. She stood in my doorway like a refugee asking for shelter. The woman who had screamed, "Get out," at her own birthday party couldn't even meet my eyes. I didn't know. The words came out broken, desperate. "Grace, you have to believe me. I didn't know what he did." She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. The confession poured out in fragments. She had watched the recording 100 times. Heard Nolan threaten her brother. Heard her father agree. "I married him. I had children with him. I wore his ring while Daniel was rotting in the ground because of him." I sat across from her and listened. Didn't comfort. Didn't attack. Just let her empty herself of 10 years of poison she hadn't known she was carrying. When her sobs finally quieted, I spoke. "You didn't know about the murder, but you knew about everything else." She looked up, confused, afraid. "You knew they blamed me. You knew I was innocent. And you smiled at his funeral, Victoria. I saw it. You were relieved he was gone." Her face crumbled. "I was jealous of him," she whispered. "He was everything I wasn't, smart, kind, good. Dad loved him more than he ever loved me. When he died, I thought—" She couldn't finish. I finished for her. "You thought you'd finally matter." She nodded, tears streaming. "I didn't want him dead. I just wanted to stop being second. And then he was gone, and I got everything I wanted, and I've hated myself every single day since." I looked at my sister. The golden child, the favorite, the queen of every room. She had been drowning in guilt for 10 years, just like they had wanted me to drown. We had both been victims. We had just been given different cages. I leaned forward. "I'm not going to pretend the last 10 years didn't happen. You let them blame me. You benefited from Daniel's death. You treated me like I didn't exist." Victoria nodded, accepting each charge. "But you're not the one who killed him. And you're not the one who made the choice to cover it up. You have a decision to make, Victoria." "What kind of decision?" "Testify. Tell the police everything you know, every conversation with Nolan you remember, every suspicious moment you ignored, every time Dad acted like he was hiding something." Her eyes widened. "They'll tear me apart. The media, the prosecutors, everyone. Yes, they will, but you'll be telling the truth for the first time in your life." Victoria was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke. "I wore his grandmother's necklace to my wedding. The man who killed my brother put it around my neck." She stood up, wiped her eyes. "I'll testify. I'll tell them everything. It's the least I owe Daniel." I nodded. "It's a start." She paused at the door. "Do you think you can ever forgive me, Grace?" I considered the question carefully. Forgiveness isn't something you earn with one conversation. It's something you build with 100 choices. She nodded slowly. "Then I'll start making better choices." She left. I sat alone in the quiet room thinking about cages and sisters and all the different ways a family can destroy itself. Victoria had been given everything and been empty. I had been given nothing and built an empire. Neither of us had been free. Maybe now we finally could be. That evening, a courier delivered an envelope, a letter from my mother, 5 pages in her careful handwriting. The first line made my hands shake. "My dearest Grace, I have spent 10 years being a coward. I have spent 10 years knowing the truth about Daniel's death." I kept reading. The confession continued. I heard the phone call that night. Richard didn't know I was listening. I heard him tell Nolan to handle it. And I said nothing. I did nothing. I let my son die, and my daughter take the blame. The final paragraph stopped my heart. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know the truth before the police hear it from me. I'm turning myself in tomorrow morning. I am an accessory to my own son's murder, and I am ready to pay for what I let happen." My mother. The woman who told me it should have been you. The woman who turned away when my father slapped me. She had known Daniel was murdered. She had known and said nothing for 10 years. I set the letter down and stared at the Manhattan skyline. There were 4 more pages of confessions, 4 more pages of secrets. And somewhere in those pages was the reason I had always been the ghost in my own family. I was about to find out everything. Victoria walked into the Connecticut State Courthouse 1 week after Nolan's arrest. Photographers swarmed the entrance. Journalists shouted questions. Cameras captured every step she took toward the building. She wore no makeup, a plain black dress, no jewelry, no armor. The golden child had finally stripped away everything that made her shine. I watched from a car parked across the street. Unseen, unnoticed, the way I had spent most of my life. But this time I chose the invisibility. This time I was the one in control. Victoria testified for 8 hours behind closed doors. She gave them everything she had promised. Every conversation with Nolan that now seemed sinister in hindsight. Every whispered discussion between her husband and father that she had dismissed as business. Every moment she had looked away and chosen not to see what was happening in front of her. She didn't try to save herself. She laid her complicity bare and let the system decide what to do with it. The prosecutors determined she hadn't known about the murder itself, but she had known about the cover-up, about the blame shifted to me, about the lies repeated for a decade. That silence had a cost. They recommended therapy, community service, ongoing cooperation. Victoria accepted everything without argument. A reporter shouted at her as she left the courthouse at sunset. "Do you have anything to say to your sister?" Victoria stopped. For a moment I thought she would break down again. Instead, she looked directly at the camera. Directly at me, though, she couldn't know I was watching. I spent 10 years being the wrong kind of sister. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be the right kind. Then she got in her car and drove away. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't redemption. But it was a start. And starts were more than I had ever gotten from anyone in my family before. 3 days later, the sentences came down. Nolan Brooks stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit. The evidence was overwhelming, the recording, the witness, the financial trail. His lawyers had negotiated, but there was nothing to negotiate with. First-degree murder, conspiracy, obstruction, witness tampering, life without parole. The judge's voice was flat and final. Nolan stood perfectly still when the sentence was read. The man who had smiled while threatening my brother's life had nothing left to smile about. The predator who had cornered me in kitchens and on terraces had finally been caged. He would die in prison, the same way Daniel had died on that rain-slicked road, alone, without anyone who truly loved him nearby. Richard's trial followed. The recording of his voice played for the jury. The Brooks deal is worth more than one man's principles. Forget what you saw, or deal with the consequences. His lawyers argued diminished responsibility, coercion by Nolan, a father manipulated by his future son-in-law. The jury didn't believe it. The judge didn't believe it. 25 years to life. He would die in prison. The patriarch who had built his empire on silence and secrets would spend his final years in a cell. Everything he had killed for was already gone. The company dissolved, the estate seized, the family name transformed from a symbol of power into a synonym for betrayal. I wasn't in the courtroom when they sentenced my father. I watched from a coffee shop 3 blocks away, the live stream playing on my phone. When the judge read the verdict, I felt something I hadn't expected. Grief. Not for the man he was, for the man he could have been, for the father who might have loved me if he hadn't loved money more. I closed the app and finished my coffee. Some funerals happen while people are still alive. I had attended my father's twice now, once at his sentencing, once in my heart when I finally let go of the hope that he might someday see me. 2 days later, another letter arrived from Catherine. Shorter than the first, just 1 page. Grace. I know I have no right to ask, but before I turn myself in, I need to see you. One time, face to face. There are things you deserve to know, things I should have told you 27 years ago. Please. Your mother. 27 years. My entire life. What could she possibly say that would matter now? What truth was left to tell? Tessa advised against meeting her. She's manipulating you. Guilty people always want absolution. Marcus said nothing. Let me decide for myself. I thought about the basement, the birthdays forgotten, the blame. I thought about Daniel who never got to confront anyone. I thought about closure, not for Catherine, for myself. I texted her back. Tomorrow, 3 in the afternoon. The garden behind the Greenwich Church. 1 hour. The garden was quiet when I arrived. Old oak trees cast shadows across stone benches. The church rose behind us but felt distant, separate. This wasn't holy ground, just neutral territory. Catherine appeared at exactly 3, punctual even now. She looked smaller than I remembered, compressed by grief and guilt. Her hands shook in her lap when she sat across from me. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I'm not here for thanks, I'm here for the truth. All of it." A long silence. Her breathing was heavy, unsteady. There are things I've never told anyone, not Richard, not Victoria, not even Daniel. "Then tell me." She took a breath that seemed to cost her everything she had left. "I was pregnant with you when Richard and I almost divorced." The words hung in the air like smoke. We had been fighting for months. He was having an affair. I thought we were done. When I found out I was pregnant, I didn't know if you were his. I felt the ground shift beneath me. 27 years of questions suddenly rearranging themselves into a new and terrible shape. I never knew for certain, she continued, tears streaming down her face. I told myself it didn't matter. But Richard knew I had been with someone else during that time. He looked at you from the day you were born and saw doubt. He couldn't be sure you were his daughter. And he punished you for it every day of your life. I sat perfectly still, processing 27 years of neglect, of blame, of being the ghost in my own family, because my father wasn't sure I was his, because my mother couldn't face her own guilt. And you. My voice was steady even as my world collapsed. "What did you see when you looked at me?" Catherine sobbed. "I saw my shame, my mistake. Every time I looked at you, I remembered the worst thing I ever did. So I was punished for something I didn't do, from the day I was born." She nodded, unable to speak. "Did you ever find out? Did you ever take a test? Ask a doctor." She shook her head. "Richard refused. He said he didn't want to know. If the test said you weren't his, he'd have to acknowledge it. This way, he could just keep you at a distance, blame you for existing without having to explain why." I stared at the woman who had given birth to me. "You let your uncertainty become my prison. You let his doubt become my identity." She reached for my hand. I pulled away. "I know," she whispered. "I know what I did. I've known for 27 years. And I've hated myself every single day. Good." The word was cold, but it was honest. "You should." I stood up, walked to the edge of the garden, looked at the trees Daniel used to climb when we were children. Everything I had believed about my place in the family was recontextualized now. I wasn't the strong one. I was the uncertain one. Not overlooked by accident, distanced by design. I had spent my whole life trying to earn love that was never available to me. Not because I was unworthy, because they were incapable. I turned back to Catherine. "You chose silence for 10 years after Daniel died. You let them blame me for his death when you knew the truth." She nodded. "You chose doubt for 27 years. You let me grow up believing I was less than nothing because you couldn't face your own mistake." "I know. I'm so sorry. Grace, please." I held up my hand. "I'm not finished." She fell silent. "I don't forgive you. I may never forgive you." Her face crumpled. "But I'm not going to let your choices define the rest of my life. You turned yourself in. You told me the truth. That's more than I ever expected from you." I paused. Let the words settle. Forgiveness isn't something you earn with one confession. It's something you build over a lifetime. And I don't know if either of us has that long. Catherine reached for me one more time. "Is there anything I can do? Anything at all?" I thought about it. Really thought. "There's one thing." Her eyes lit with desperate hope. "Anything. Live with it. Live with knowing what you did. Live with the silence you kept. Live with the truth you hid. That's your sentence, Catherine. Not prison, not punishment, just living with yourself. The hope in her eyes died. She understood. The worst punishment I could give her wasn't anger. It was leaving her alone with her conscience. Goodbye, Catherine. I walked away, didn't look back. That night I drove to the airport. A private jet waited on the tarmac. My jet. Purchased 3 months ago for a moment exactly like this one. Destination: Nujuma Island, Red Sea, my new home, my new beginning. Through the window, I watched New York disappear below, the city where I had revealed my empire, confronted my family, found the truth about why I had never been loved. Below me somewhere, Richard sat in a cell. Nolan sat in a cell. Victoria was rebuilding. Catherine was living with her ghosts. The pilot announced 14 hours to destination. I closed my eyes and slept. Deeply, dreamlessly, for the first time in 10 years. When I woke, the sun was rising over the Red Sea, gold and crimson painting the water like a promise kept. Below me, I could see the island, my island, 2 white mansions glowing in the morning light. $100 million of peace, 27 years of truth, a lifetime of silence finally broken. The plane descended. I pressed my palm against the window like I used to press it against the basement ceiling, feeling for the family that lived above me. But this time there was no ceiling, no basement, no family to prove myself to, just the sky, the sea, and the woman I had become. "Welcome to Nujuma Island, Miss Whitmore," the pilot said. I smiled. No, just grace. Just grace is enough. The morning sun rose over the Red Sea like a promise that had finally been kept. I woke without an alarm for the first time in years. No strategy to execute, no evidence to gather, no enemies to plan against. Just the sound of waves through open windows and the smell of salt air drifting across white linen sheets. 6 months since I arrived on this island. 6 months of learning how to breathe without counting the seconds until the next battle. I walked barefoot on the private beach as I did every morning now. Sand cool beneath my feet, waves lapping at my ankles. The horizon stretched endlessly in every direction, no walls, no ceilings, no basement pressing down on my dreams, just the sky and the sea and the woman I had finally become. I used to wake up counting the things I needed to survive. Now I woke up counting the things I was grateful for. The list had gotten longer than I ever imagined possible. The 2 mansions rose behind me. $100 million of proof that the forgotten daughter had become unforgettable. But standing here watching the sunrise, I understood something that had taken me 28 years to learn. The money was never the point. The revenge was never the destination. They were just the doors I had to walk through to find my way here, to this moment, to this peace, to this version of myself that no one could diminish anymore. I had spent 18 years in a basement dreaming of sunlight. Now I owned the sunrise. Some mornings I still reached for my phone to check if the world had fallen apart. Old habits from years of vigilance. But the world hadn't fallen apart. It had rearranged itself. My father was in prison. Nolan was in prison. My mother was living with her ghosts somewhere in Connecticut. And I was standing on an island in the Red Sea where no one had ever heard the name Whitmore. Here I was, just Grace. And Grace was finally enough. The East Mansion held my office now. A small room with windows overlooking the water and walls lined with photographs. Daniel's face watched over me from a frame on my desk. The same photograph I had kept in my Boston dorm room all those years ago. The same brother who had believed in me when no one else did. This was where I built something new, something that mattered beyond revenge. The Daniel Whitmore Foundation launched 4 months ago. The mission was simple: supporting young women who had been overlooked, dismissed, pushed aside by families and systems that should have protected them. Scholarships for first-generation college students, grants for women starting businesses without family capital, legal aid for survivors of abuse and financial manipulation. I couldn't give Daniel his life back, but I could make sure his death meant something. 23 scholarships awarded in the first quarter. 14 small business grants distributed, 47 women receiving legal assistance, each one a story I recognized. The overlooked, the underestimated, the forgotten. Each one proof that invisible girls could become unstoppable women if someone just gave them a chance. They sent me letters sometimes, thank you notes, stories about what the foundation meant to them. One girl wrote, "You made me believe I was worth investing in." I kept that letter in my desk drawer. On hard days I read it again. Let her words remind me why any of this mattered. Marcus visited last month to review the foundation's progress. He looked at the numbers and the impact reports and the letters from recipients. Then he looked at me with something I had rarely seen in his eyes. Pride. Daniel would be proud, he said. I shook my head. Daniel would say, "We're just getting started." Marcus smiled, that rare, quiet smile he reserved for moments that mattered. He'd be right, but he'd still be proud. I thought about my brother that night standing on the balcony with stars scattered across the Red Sea sky. Proud wasn't the word I would have chosen, but it was the word I needed to hear. Tessa arrived 3 days ago from Chicago. Her suitcase still sat half unpacked in the guest room. Mornings we had coffee on the terrace reviewing foundation paperwork. Afternoons we walked the beach talking about everything except the past. She had been my lawyer, now she was my friend. The distinction mattered more than I had expected. She looked different here, relaxed, laughing more easily. The sharp attorney armor softened by island air and distance from everything we had fought through together. "You know," she said one evening, "I've represented a lot of clients, helped a lot of people fight their battles, but I've never seen anyone win quite like you did. I didn't win," I told her. "I survived. Then I built something." She considered that for a moment. Same thing sometimes. She asked me once if I was lonely here. I thought about it before answering. I spent 18 years surrounded by family and completely alone. Now I'm alone when I choose to be and surrounded when I need to be. That's not loneliness. That's freedom. She nodded slowly like she was memorizing the words. I think I need to learn that. The difference between alone and lonely. It took me 27 years, I told her. Take your time. Every month I wrote a letter to Daniel. Not sent anywhere, just written, then read aloud to the sea, a ritual of remembrance, a way of keeping him present even though he had been gone for 11 years. Tonight's letter was different. Tonight was the anniversary of his death. I sat on the beach at sunset with paper in my hands, the words I had written that afternoon. Dear Daniel, it's been 11 years since you died. 11 years since I heard your voice. 11 years since you told me not to trust any of them. You were right. About all of it. About Dad. About Nolan. About the company. About everything. I did what you asked. I found the truth. I made sure the world knew. But that's not why I'm writing tonight. I'm writing because I finally understand something. You didn't save me to get revenge. You saved me so I could live. For 10 years I thought my purpose was justice. Exposing them. Destroying what they built. But that was never the point, was it? The point was surviving, building, becoming someone they couldn't diminish anymore. The revenge was just the door. The life on the other side was the gift. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a small wooden box. 11 letters now, one for each year. My history, my proof. My conversation with the brother I lost and the woman I became. The last line of my letter said, I'm happy, Daniel. Not every day, not without scars, but happy in a way I never thought I could be. I hope wherever you are you can feel it. I hope you know that everything you did worked. I'm free, I'm whole, I'm yours. I pressed the letter to my heart before I put it away. The sun had set. Stars were emerging. And somewhere out there I believed my brother was watching. He had always watched over me. Even now. Especially now. I walked back to the house as darkness settled over the island. Passed through the foyer. Stopped at the small studio I had built on the left side of the main staircase. The room I had chosen deliberately, my art studio now, where I painted, created, existed without purpose, except joy. The basement had been on the left of the staircase, too. I had transformed that curse into a choice. I looked at myself in the studio mirror, 28 years old, stronger than I had ever been. The bruise from my father's slap had faded months ago, but I still remembered exactly how it felt. Not to hold on to pain, to remember where I came from, what I survived, what I built from the ruins. I used to ask myself, why me? Why the basement? Why the blame? Why the invisibility? I thought there had to be a reason. Something I did wrong, something I could fix. Now I understood. There was no reason, just broken people making broken choices. The only thing I could control was what I did with the aftermath. And I had turned aftermath into empire, silence into speech, a ghost into a woman who couldn't be ignored. I thought about my mother's last words to me in the garden. Is there anything I can do? I had told her to live with it. 6 months later, I heard she had started volunteering at a women's shelter in Greenwich. Anonymous, quiet, not for publicity, maybe for penance, maybe for peace. I didn't know if I would ever forgive her, but I was glad she was trying to become someone worth forgiving. That was more than I expected, more than I hoped for, and somehow it was enough. Late that evening, I stood on the balcony of my mansion, stars scattered across the darkness like promises kept, the Red Sea quiet below, waves keeping time with my heartbeat. Tomorrow would bring new work, new recipients for the foundation, new chances to turn invisible girls into unstoppable women. But tonight was for stillness, for gratitude, for being present in a peace I had earned with everything I had. I used to think the opposite of being forgotten was being seen. I was wrong. The opposite of being forgotten is being at peace with yourself, when you no longer need their eyes to know you exist, when their silence doesn't define your worth, when you can stand alone in the dark and know exactly who you are. I pressed my palm against the railing. Cool metal, solid, real. I wasn't reaching for a ceiling anymore, wasn't trying to feel the family above me. I was just standing, breathing, being. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. If you've ever been pushed out of the place that was supposed to be your home, I see you. If you've ever been blamed for something you didn't do, silenced by people who should have protected you, I hear you. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, wondering if you'd ever be enough, I understand. Because I was you. I am you. And I'm telling you now, it gets better, not because they change, because you do. So tell me your story. Drop it in the comments. Let me know if you saw yourself somewhere in mine, and if this story meant something to you, if it made you feel less alone even for a moment. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the furthest. Sometimes the forgotten ones build the biggest empires. Sometimes the ghost becomes the light, like subscribe, stay. Your story matters too. This story is fictionalized for dramatic effect.